So I've been following the news in regards to Bulgaria and its admission to the Schengen area. Both Austria and the Netherlands were blocking this admission as of recent, and now it seems the Dutch government has approved, and now it's only Austria that's still continuing to be hesitant on adding Bulgaria to the free movement area of Europe. And obviously, as a Dutch citizen living in Bulgaria, this is quite interesting for me to follow, both because, well, I have a tight connection with both countries and also because I travel a lot, and I would appreciate saving some time on showing my passport each time at the border checks in Europe. Now, you can view the topic of Bulgaria's admission to Schengen from several angles. So the Dutch angle typically is that Bulgaria is a corrupt country. It has corrupt border patrol and such, although I think that's pretty much in reverse right now because Bulgaria has done some work on its corruption. And in fact, I think Bulgaria should receive some respect because it actually protects the outer borders of the European Union with Turkey, and that's been done at the nation's own peril because several officers during this and the last few years have lost their lives in actually protecting the borders from people who crossed illegally, and fatal accidents have happened in traffic because when officers try to stop buses that crossed illegally or people who crossed illegally and then got into buses, I think that's how it really worked. Several fatal accidents have happened, and it's a huge tragedy because obviously these officers don't get paid a whole lot, although perhaps nowadays it's increased a bit. But you can imagine losing your life for something that's not your issue at all. You just try to put your heart on the line, and you just get involved in something that's much bigger than yourself, and your family doesn't see you again. Something fairly horrible, which has never been discussed in Dutch news, and I think the sacrifices that Bulgaria does in order to protect the European Union's outer borders, and in fact protecting it from policies that are not its own. Bulgaria has it adapts all the EU's immigration purposes, but basically nobody wants to stay in this country because there's no benefits and there's fairly little work. So people crossing just prefer to move onwards to Western Europe. Now, it's not Bulgaria that invited anyone in, so Bulgaria is put up with the task to protect the borders from a huge influx that's not its own cause, which puts the population in a difficult and a very annoying spot because it's typically caught between two worlds, the East and the West, as always, and it's in a fairly weak position in and of itself, and the Bulgarians typically don't really feel they can relate to either the West or the East because they always pull the short end of the stick. That being said, it is very important to underline the strategic position of Bulgaria, and that's also where the European Union and Schengen come into play, and why it is so important to give Bulgaria the benefit of the doubt in this regard. In terms of geopolitics, there's two very important countries in Europe that you do want in your realm of influence if you're Europe, or if you're anyone else for that matter, but it is in the geographical area of Europe, and it's vital to have those two countries, which are both Bulgaria and Poland. Now, both by looking at a map of Europe and by looking at the European history, you will understand that these countries truly are in the crossroads of Europe for several reasons, but mostly because of its neighbors and because it's really in either the heartland, Poland, or on the outer, how should I say, periphery. The same goes for Ukraine, although that's not yet in the European Union, so I can pretty much overlook that country for now. The EU countries that are most vital for geopolitics are Poland and Bulgaria. And in the light of current events, the EU is looking to strengthen its position, which is very logical. So it is expanding by also having negotiations with both Moldova and Ukraine. It's a whole other topic I'm not going to get into. My specialism is Bulgaria and the Netherlands, so let's focus on that. There is such a thing as soft power when it comes to geopolitics. That means, for example, that a culture is hugely influenced by either a Western, an Eastern, or, for example, a Turkish or Arabic culture. So let's say, as an example, the whole Arabic world is heavily influenced by Egypt. Egypt has many big news channels, many media reside in Egypt, books are written there. It is pretty much a standardized version of Arabic as well. So if you speak Egyptian Arabic, people understand you everywhere. Russia has the same soft power in terms of Eastern Europe, although less and less so. Interestingly, in terms of Bulgaria, it has a very Western outlook. The US and Europe have the biggest soft power in Bulgaria. People all speak English, young people don't speak Russian anymore, and are unlikely to be able to order a glass of wine in fluent Russian when they would visit. And in reverse, they're unlikely to understand a food or drink order from a Russian who's sitting down on a terrace in Sofia. I've seen that myself. In the realm of influence and importance, the older generations are less and less important. Obviously, they would understand Russian, they have learned it in school. But these generations are slowly slipping away from us, sadly. Though that may be, the eyes are obviously on the young populace, and the young population in Bulgaria, let's say Bulgaria nowadays, is pretty much Sofia and Plovdiv, because outside the cities are pretty much dying and the young people are all in the major urban areas. So you could really say, for example, France is not Paris, but in Bulgaria, yes, I know it's a pretty big country, but economically and culturally speaking, Bulgaria is pretty much Sofia and Plovdiv, and in a lesser sense, so Varna and Burgas, the coastal cities, but apart from that, there's little focus on all of the other areas. In the urban centers, you have the young population which works for European companies, international companies. They speak fluent English. And even many people who don't speak English or just work for Bulgarian companies, they are probably better off than if they were not in Europe. I know it's a bit of a controversial opinion to have because many people complain about the European Union. But look at your standard and look at that of your grandparents. I know in socialism, many people say it was easier. You had your job, you had your security, and you could go on vacation for 5 leva and eat soup or a wonderful barbecue dish for 50 cents. And I know that's all true, but currently, honestly, would you go back to their position? Like, would you honestly, if you had a choice right now, would you go live in that era in particular, in their position? Like, perhaps you would, but I strongly doubt that many people would, because in the centers, the urban centers, people nowadays have their modern day comforts. And especially from 2018 onwards, there's been a sort of switch where Bulgaria started to get a little better, salary increase happens. Inflation is now a big thing, but if the salaries will eventually get up and will have some sort of European standard, again, I know it's a bit of a controversial thing to say because many people are struggling. Would you honestly trade places with your parents or grandparents? I doubt so. I haven't lived in socialism, so I cannot speak on anyone's behalf, but I just notice things. And I see in Bulgaria a European country for all its faults. Nowadays, I would say the Netherlands has more faults. The Netherlands nowadays is a violent narco state with hundreds of attacks on, let's say, the public. We have stabbings, we have shootings every day. If you read the Dutch news, we have explosions from the underworld. People bomb each other's houses for reasons because they're in debt in either the, how should I say it, to some underdog. And crime is out of control in my country. In Bulgaria, that's not really the case. In the Netherlands, we have huge narco problems because through many Dutch posts, even drugs are sent throughout the whole world, and the Netherlands doesn't have good control of its borders and of its forces. There's huge corruption in the ports of Rotterdam as well, which has been uncovered. So the Netherlands cannot raise its finger at Bulgaria anymore nowadays, and Dutch people are struggling to get used to that because they're still stuck in a 1970s mindset where the Netherlands was the best country in the world. So yesterday I was reading the Dutch news and an article caught my eye and it said that the Netherlands would eventually approve Bulgaria's admission to Schengen. Basically for people who have at least some knowledge of the world and the place they live in, what Schengen means is just freedom of movement without showing your passport. And for Bulgaria it's pretty significant because it would open a corridor from, well, basically Sweden, the Netherlands, all the way to Greece. And you could have a truck that drives from Greece to the Netherlands without any stops, without any border checks. Now for trucks, I don't know how that would work exactly, but you know the implications are very significant when you cut out two border checks from the route from Greece to Western Europe. You make Bulgaria a viable trading partner where it was previously considered sort of a backland. And its population is shrinking, but if you walk through Bulgarian population centers nowadays, you see people starting to have families more and more. There's lots of kids actually in cities. I'm actually fairly positive Bulgaria will be able to reverse this negative trend of depopulation. Now, what I always do to follow the general opinion of Dutch people is I open the comment section of the news article, which is ill-advised, but sometimes you find a bit of a balance of how the people think. About 50% of the Dutch people were commenting that the admission of Bulgaria to Schengen would lead to a huge influx of migrants, of refugees and whatnot. Now they fail to understand that Bulgaria has been part of the EU since 2007 and that the Netherlands is already full of Bulgarians who study and work there, and I think the Netherlands would actually have a huge loss of people when Bulgaria would not be in the EU because they have a lot of vital positions, for example, in hospitals, in programming and IT, but even cleaning offices. And there's many Bulgarians doing your dirty work in hotels and whatnot. Now, I want to disclaim that the Netherlands is a tolerant and open-minded society because it's really not. It is when you're, for example, gay, but to me that's not necessarily open-minded and tolerant. Well, in a sense it is, but to me open-mindedness means that you have an outward view into the world and you know what's going on, at least on your continent, that you have a sort of interest in other countries that you share the continent with. And in particular to Eastern Europe, the Dutch have always had a huge disdain and they always looked down upon Poland, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria in particular. Bulgaria is the black sheep of Europe. Serbia they don't know a whole lot about. Albania they don't know anything about. Obviously they don't know a lot about Bulgaria, but the things they do know is it's been in the news a lot. There's been fraud of some Bulgarians in my country, and Bulgaria has never been put in a positive light, which you cannot blame the Dutch for, but definitely you can blame the government for, and the Dutch media, and obviously the Bulgarians who committed fraud, although that's just a small fraction of the many, many tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of Bulgarians who live in the Netherlands and far beyond the Bulgarian borders. So many Dutch people, they were really negative on the approval of the Dutch government to allow Bulgaria to Schengen, and I was slightly disappointed, but it always shows to me that the tables are really turning because the Netherlands, it's always on its high horse that they are still the best in Europe, but they're being taken over by many other countries in Europe, even in terms of, in terms of economy, the Dutch are still very big, mostly because of the port and the knowledge that they have, but In terms of digital economy, digitalization, Eastern Europe and in particular Estonia, Bulgaria not so much, but Estonia can give the Netherlands a good run for its money. And they're actually improving, whereas I see the Netherlands stagnating on a lot of things and even decreasing in quality of living, whereas in Eastern Europe that's pretty much reverse. Despite the inflation currently, it always has a road full of bumps ahead of it, but Eastern Europe is slowly but steadily improving, some countries faster than others. And that's something that Dutch people always fail to see, and their eyes only open, as I saw in the comment section as well, where some people were correcting the other ignorant Dutch people by saying, listen, I work for an international company and my Bulgarian colleagues in IT are some of the warmest and most hospitable people I've ever met. When I go to Sofia, they invite me to stay at them, to come for dinner. They are very, very fast and productive at work. They have a huge knowledge. They're well educated. And their eyes only open when they've actually gotten to experience the Bulgarians and the IT hub that Sofia has always been, or at least for the past 10 years, and currently still is, because we have a huge, huge base of knowledge here in Sofia. And slowly, especially since 2020, the Dutch, let's say, quality of life has run downhill because we're faced with the same inflation. We've had a huge housing crisis. We had some huge scandals in politics, of which the cabinet has fallen, and now, currently, the Dutch have voted massively on center-right parties, as we've recently seen. I don't know what implications that will have, probably not too many, because we're a solid democracy, but the Dutch eyes have opened in realizing that it's not really the country that it used to be in the 70s. And if you ask any Dutch person, would you want to live in the 70s, the era of your parents or perhaps your grandparents? Not so much, because we had a lot of poverty after the Second World War. But would you live in the 60s, 70s? Every Dutch person will say yes, I would. I would trade places with the current era. So my country is pretty much stagnating, whereas in Bulgaria I see the reverse. Yes, we have the provinces with huge poverty, but even there we see a little switch. The old cars are all gone. They're all gone. Once Bulgaria gets on its legs economically a little bit better, it opens up towards Europe a bit more. Despite all of the corruption in the European Union, I strongly doubt Bulgaria could do any better on its own at this very moment, and also in regards to its other neighbors. I strongly doubt they could find a better sphere of influence to be a part of, and many young and educated Bulgarians do realize that. At the same hand, Bulgaria is fairly balanced politically. It doesn't go overboard with either left or right wing politics. I find it very decent, and I find Bulgarians always very level headed. I find most Bulgarians fairly politically aware that they actually understand what Schengen means, whereas many Dutch people don't. For Bulgarians, they were slightly disappointed, a bit angry at the Netherlands for refusing the admission so far, although obviously they also realized that Bulgaria did and still does have a lot of corruption, so they do understand where it comes from. Although really, we'll see how it plays out in the future. I only see good things happening for Bulgaria. I hope the depopulation will at some point switch around, though that's easier said than done. I don't really see the bleak outlook that I had perhaps even 5 years ago. Bulgarians are fairly resilient, and I see that even despite current inflation, I think Bulgaria is in the roughest position in the whole EU, with prices as high in Germany, but salaries as low as in Serbia. People still sort of seem to get by. I guess instead they just skip haircuts and bake pancakes, and I don't see I don't see any difference really in the outlook that the poor people have always been poor in Bulgaria, and they sort of get by. Like, it sounds easier for me to say, but I'm just sort of complimenting the things and the how should I say, the struggles that Bulgarians deal with on a daily basis, I can only admire them for sort of pulling through. And I guess how they do that is just because they know that they don't have another choice. It's either pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, as they say in the US. That's what you do when you live in this country, especially outside the city, or it's moving abroad. And they pretty much uh, cut the cord quite quickly, and they either move or they stay, and they just pull through and keep a fairly positive outlook. And their outward view and their resilience is, I think, something the Dutch people can learn a lot from, because we in the Netherlands have had huge salary increases over the past few years because of the shortage of the labor market. You can easily pull in 4K a month in the Netherlands for even a little bit above basic jobs, office setting jobs. 3-4K is not out of the ordinary. Whereas in Bulgaria, well, good luck getting that even in high positions. But the Netherlands are complaining all the time that, well, the Dutch people complain that they don't get by, but still they can easily have a couple hundred to set apart each month. So in its level-headedness, I think Bulgaria has a fairly competitive position in Europe, not only geopolitically speaking, but also in terms of just the whole mindset that the nation has. It has a huge capacity, and I think Bulgaria should just stay in Europe, although I'm obviously not Bulgarian, so I cannot decide on anyone's behalf. I see a future for Bulgaria, and I see a future for all the Bulgarians living in the European Union who are developing themselves. We shouldn't overlook them either. The whole Schengen thing is just a formality, an administrative thing. Obviously, the EU and politics in general is all about hard and soft power, and expanding your realm of influence is what it's about, so it will happen.